She was told she was broken until she danced for the Alpha who could destroy kingdoms. They said her body was worthless. They said she'd never stand before power again. But when the most ruthless Alpha in the realm forced her to perform the one thing that destroyed her life, she turned her scars into a weapon that would shatter everything they knew. Stay until the end to see how the outcast becomes the queen. Drop a like and tell us what city you're watching from. The rain hadn't stopped in Mistvale Hollow for 3 days. It came down in cold, relentless sheets, turning the dirt roads into rivers of mud and the forest into a dripping, mournful cathedral. The kind of rain that made you feel small, the kind that reminded you the world didn't care whether you lived or died. Alara Vane stood at the edge of her cabin porch, one hand braced against the splintered wooden post, the other clutching a wool shawl that had seen better years. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes down her back. Her bare feet were filthy, toes curled against the cold. She didn't care. She was watching the road, not because she expected anyone. No one came out here anymore, not since the fall, not since the day her life had ended in front of everyone who mattered. But old habits died hard, and part of her, some stupid, stubborn part, still looked, still waited, still hoped, even though hope was a poison she couldn't afford. Her leg ached. It always ached. The left one. The one that had shattered when she fell from the ceremonial platform 2 years ago, in front of the entire pack, in front of the elders, in front of him. The bone had healed crooked. The healer had done what she could, but there were limits. Mistvale Hollow wasn't a place of plenty. Resources went to those who mattered. Alara no longer mattered. She limped back inside, letting the door bang shut behind her. The cabin was small. One room, a fireplace, a cot shoved against the wall, a table with 2 chairs she never used. It smelled like wet wood and old smoke. It was hers, technically. Her grandmother's, left to her when the old woman died. No one else had wanted it. Too far from the village center, too close to the wild edge where the forest grew thick and the things that lived there grew bolder. Alara didn't mind. The wild didn't judge. She crossed to the fireplace and fed it another log, wincing as her leg protested. The flame caught, crackling to life, casting orange light across the walls. She sank into the chair beside it and rubbed her thigh, kneading the muscle around the old break. It wouldn't help. It never did. But it gave her hand something to do. The silence pressed in. She hated the silence. It made her think, made her remember. The grand hall. The music. The eyes. The fall. She squeezed her eyes shut and forced the memory back down. Not tonight. She couldn't do that tonight. A knock at the door made her jolt upright. For a moment, she didn't move. No one knocked. No one came. She wasn't imagining it. She could hear boots shifting on the porch, could hear the low murmur of voices. Her heart started to pound. Slowly she stood, limped to the door, rested her hand on the latch. Who is it? Open up, Vane. She recognized the voice. Torin, one of the pack sentries. Young, cocky, always looking for an excuse to flex whatever small authority he'd been given. Alara's jaw tightened. She opened the door a crack. Torin stood there with another sentry, both of them soaked through, both of them looking annoyed. Behind them, the rain poured down in curtains. What do you want? Torin smirked. Good to see you too. I asked what you want. Pack summons. He pulled a folded piece of parchment from his coat and shoved it toward her. Everyone's required to attend, no exceptions. Alara stared at the parchment like it was a snake. I don't attend pack gatherings. You do now. Torin's smirk widened. High Alpha Kyle Draven is coming to Mistvale Hollow. Royal inspection. Every member of the pack has to be present. That includes you. The name hit her like a fist. Kyle Draven, the High Alpha, the ruler of the Northern Territories. The wolf whose bloodline went back 1,000 years, whose word was law, whose power was absolute. He was a legend, a nightmare, a myth made flesh. And he was coming here. Why? Alara's voice came out flat. Torin shrugged. Does it matter? Orders are orders. You show up or you're in violation of pack law. And trust me, Vane, you don't want that. The second sentry, older, grayer, less amused, spoke up. It's in 3 days. At the hall. Formal attendance required. Alara's throat tightened. The hall. The place where everything had ended. I can't. You will, Torin interrupted, unless you want to be dragged there in chains. Your call. He tossed the parchment onto the porch and turned away, laughing as he went. The older sentry gave her a look, something almost like pity, before following. Alara stood there shivering, staring at the folded paper on the wet wood. Then she slammed the door and locked it. But the next 2 days passed in a fog. Alara tried to tell herself it didn't matter. She'd go. She'd stand in the back. She'd stay quiet. No one would notice her. No one ever did anymore. But her hand shook every time she thought about it. The Grand Hall wasn't just a building. It was the heart of the pack. The place where ceremonies were held, where mates were bonded, where the sacred dances were performed to honor the ancestors and strengthen the ties between wolf and spirit. And it was the place where Alara had been perfect. Once. Before the fall, she had been the pride of Mistvale Hollow, a prodigy. Chosen at 14 to train in the old ways, to learn the movements that connected the physical and the spiritual, to become a conduit for the pack's unity. She had spent years perfecting every step, every turn, every gesture. She had been flawless. And then, at 17, during the most important ceremony of her life, the one that would have sealed her bond with Davron Hale, the pack's heir, the man she had loved since childhood, she had fallen. Not stumbled, not slipped. Fallen. From the ceremonial platform, 10 feet down. Her leg had snapped like kindling. The sound had echoed through the hall. She remembered the silence that followed, the way everyone had stared, the way Davron had stepped back, his face pale, his eyes wide. She remembered the healer shaking her head. She remembered Davron leaving. She remembered the elders telling her gently that she could no longer serve the pack in the old ways, that her body was no longer fit for the sacred movements, that she should step aside. She remembered the way people stopped looking at her, and then slowly they stopped seeing her at all. Alara pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched the rain. She hadn't been back to the hall since. On the third day, she dressed. She had one decent dress left, dark gray wool, simple, high-necked, long-sleeved. It had been her mother's. It smelled faintly of lavender and old cedar. She braided her hair and pinned it back. No jewelry, no adornment. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just didn't want to give them another reason to stare. The walk to the hall took twice as long as it should have. Her leg dragged. The mud sucked at her boots. By the time she reached the village center, her breath was coming hard and her hip was screaming. The hall loomed ahead, a massive structure of dark wood and stone, its peaked roof cutting into the gray sky. Torches burned along the entrance despite the daylight. Wolves were already gathering, streaming in through the double doors. Alara stopped at the base of the steps. Her hands were shaking again. You can do this. Just get through it. Just survive. She climbed. Inside, the hall was exactly as she remembered. High vaulted ceilings, carved beams, the scent of pine and smoke and old magic. Rows of benches filled the space, already crowded with pack members. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat the elders, 5 of them, draped in ceremonial furs, their faces carved from stone. Alara kept her head down and moved toward the back. She found a spot in the corner, half hidden by a support beam, and pressed herself against the wall. No one looked at her. Good. The murmur of voices filled the air. Excitement, nerves, speculation. Did you hear the High Alpha travels with a full guard? I heard he executed an entire pack for defying him. He's never come this far south before. Why now? Maybe he's looking for a mate. Laughter, whispers. Alara closed her eyes and tried to breathe. Then the doors at the front of the hall opened. Silence dropped like a hammer. Alara opened her eyes and saw him. Cale Draven walked into the hall like he owned it, like he owned the air, like gravity bent around him. He was tall, taller than any wolf Alara had ever seen. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, his face all sharp lines and cold angles. He wore black from head to toe, leather and steel, a long coat that moved like shadow. His eyes swept the room, pale and piercing, the color of winter ice. Power radiated off him in waves. Alara felt it in her bones, felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest, felt her wolf curl up small and quiet inside her, instinctively submissive. He was terrifying. The elders rose and bowed. The pack followed, heads lowering, necks baring. Alara bowed too. She didn't have a choice. Kale didn't acknowledge any of it. He moved to the center of the hall, his boots echoing on the stone floor, and stopped. When he spoke, his voice was low and smooth and absolutely in command. "I won't waste your time," he said. "This is a routine inspection. I'm here to assess the strength of this pack, its leadership, its traditions. You will demonstrate your worth. Those who fail will answer for it." A ripple of unease moved through the room. Kyle's gaze swept over them again, slow and deliberate. "We begin with the sacred traditions. I want to see your dancers." Alara's stomach dropped. One of the elders stepped forward, an older woman named Marin. "Of course, High Alpha. We have several trained in the old ways. They will perform for you." "Good." Kyle's expression didn't change. "I want to see all of them." "All?" "Everyone who has ever been trained in the sacred movements. I want them on the platform, now." Marin hesitated. "High Alpha, some of our former dancers are no longer active." "I didn't ask if they were active. I asked for all of them." The air in the hall grew colder. Marin's gaze flicked briefly toward the back of the room, toward Alara. "No, no!" Alara's heart slammed against her ribs. Marin cleared her throat. "High Alpha, there is one. But she is no longer capable. An injury. Bring her forward. She cannot dance. Then she can stand. Bring her forward." Alara couldn't breathe. Every eye in the hall turned toward her. She wanted to run, wanted to disappear, wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. But Torin was already moving toward her, grinning, and there was nowhere to go. He grabbed her arm and yanked her forward. "Come on, Vane, don't keep the High Alpha waiting." Alara stumbled. Her leg buckled. She caught herself against the wall, her face burning. The whispers started immediately. "That's her? The one who fell? She's useless now. Why is she even here?" Torin dragged her toward the platform. She tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. Her legs screamed. She could barely keep her feet under her. They reached the center of the hall. Kael Draven stood 5 feet away. Alara couldn't look at him, couldn't lift her eyes. She stared at the floor, shaking, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "Name," Kael said. "Alara Vane." Marin answered for her. "She was one of our most promising dancers, until her injury." "What happened?" "She fell during a ceremony. Her leg was shattered. She has not performed since." Kael was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Dance." Alara's head snapped up. What?" "You heard me. Dance." "I can't." "Then you're useless." The word cut through her like a blade. Someone in the crowd laughed. Alara's vision blurred, her hands clenched into fists. "High Alpha," Marin began. "She truly cannot—" "If she was trained, she can dance." Kael's voice was flat, final. "Unless you're telling me your pack trains failures." Another laugh, louder this time. Alara's chest was so tight she thought it might crack open. She looked at the platform, the same platform she had fallen from, the same place where everything had ended. And then she looked at Kael Draven. His eyes were on her, cold, unreadable, waiting. He's testing me, humiliating me, proving a point. But something else flickered in those pale eyes, something she couldn't name. Alara took a breath, then another. And then, slowly, she stepped onto the platform. The crowd went silent. She stood there, trembling, her bad legs shaking beneath her weight. She didn't know what she was doing, didn't know how this was going to end, but she was so tired of being nothing, so tired of disappearing. The music started, low drums, a single flute, the old rhythm that lived in her bones. Alara closed her eyes, and she moved. Not the way she used to, not perfect, not graceful. She moved the way a broken thing moves, halting, uneven, her bad leg dragging, her balance off, her arms reaching for something she couldn't hold. But she didn't stop. She turned pain into motion, turned her limp into a beat, turned her scars into story. Every step was a fight. Every breath was a scream she wouldn't let out. She danced survival, danced grief, danced fury. And somewhere in the middle of it, she stopped caring what they saw. She danced for herself. When the music ended, she stood there gasping, sweat running down her face, her leg barely holding her up. The hall was silent. Alara opened her eyes. Kael Draven was staring at her, not at her leg, not at her struggle, at her. And for the first time in 2 years, someone saw her. Then he did something no one expected. He rose, and he walked toward her. The entire hall held its breath. Kael stopped at the edge of the platform. His eyes never left hers. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "Who told you that you were broken?" Ilara's throat closed. Kael reached out and took her hand. The bond snapped into place like lightning. Ilara gasped. Her knees buckled. The world tilted. "Mate!" The word roared through her mind, primal and absolute. Kael caught her before she fell. And when he lifted his head and looked at the pack, his expression was colder than death. "This," he said, his voice ringing through the hall, "is my mate, and anyone who dares question her worth answers to me." The room erupted, but Ilara heard none of it, because Kael Draven, the most powerful alpha alive, was holding her like she mattered. And for the first time in 2 years, she believed it. The silence shattered like glass. Chaos erupted in the grand hall, voices rising, bodies shifting, the air thick with shock and confusion. Ilara couldn't process any of it. Her legs had given out completely, and if Kael Draven hadn't been holding her, she would have collapsed on the platform like a puppet with cut strings. His arm was around her waist, solid and unyielding. She could feel the heat of him through her dress, could smell leather and pine, and something darker. Something that made her wolf whimper and press closer even as her human mind screamed at her to pull away. "Mate." The word pulsed through her like a second heartbeat. It wasn't a thought. It was a truth carved into her bones, undeniable and absolute. But it was impossible. People like Kael Draven didn't have mates like her, broken, discarded, worthless. "Let me go," she whispered. Kael's grip didn't loosen. "No. Please, look at me." She couldn't. She was shaking too hard, her vision blurring, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The hall was spinning. The faces in the crowd blurred together, shock, anger, confusion, disgust. "Ilara." His voice was low, commanding, and it cut through the noise like a blade. "Look at me." She forced her eyes up. Kael's face was inches from hers. Those pale eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. There was no softness in him, no warmth. But there was something else, something fierce and unyielding that wrapped around her like armor. "You're mine now," he said quietly. "Do you understand?" She didn't. She didn't understand any of this. But before she could answer, a voice rang out from the crowd. "This is madness!" Ilara flinched. She knew that voice. Davern Hale pushed his way to the front, his face flushed, his hands clenched into fists. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, broad-shouldered, golden-haired, handsome in the way that had once made her heart race. Now it just made her stomach turn. He stopped at the base of the platform, his eyes blazing. "Hi, Alpha. With all due respect, you can't possibly—" "I can't what?" Kael's voice was soft, dangerous. Davron faltered. She's not fit to be your mate. She's broken. She can't even walk properly, let alone what?" Kael's tone didn't change, but the temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Finish that sentence." Davron's jaw tightened. "She's a liability, a cripple. She has no standing in this pack, no value." Kael moved so fast Ilara didn't see it coming. One moment he was beside her. The next he was in front of Davron, one hand fisted in the younger man's shirt, lifting him onto his toes. The hall went dead silent. "Say that again," Kael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to make sure I heard you correctly." Davron's face had gone white. Hi, Alpha, I didn't mean—" "You just called my mate worthless. In front of me. In front of this entire pack." Kael leaned in closer. "Do you have any idea what the penalty for that is? Please, death." Kael's eyes were empty, cold. "The penalty is death." Davron made a strangled sound. Ilara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She wanted to say something, do something, but her voice was gone. Then Kael released Davron, letting him stumble backward. "But I'm feeling generous today," Kael said. "So I'll give you a choice. Apologize to her, on your knees, or leave this territory and never return." The crowd was frozen. Davron looked at Alara, his face twisted with humiliation and rage. For a moment she thought he might actually do it, might actually kneel, but then his lip curled and he spat at the ground near her feet. "Keep the cripple," he said. "You deserve each other." He turned and walked out of the hall. No one stopped him. Cale watched him go, expression unreadable. Then he turned back to the elders. "Anyone else have something to say?" Marin stepped forward, her face carefully neutral. "High Alpha, we mean no disrespect. But the bond, it's unprecedented. Alara Vane has no rank, no family ties, no standing within. She has me." Kael's voice cut through the air like a whip. "That's the only standing she needs." Marin opened her mouth, closed it, bowed her head. Kyle turned to the rest of the pack. "Let me make this very clear. Alara Vane is my mate, my equal. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. Anyone who harms her answers to me, and I promise you," his eyes swept over them, cold and merciless, "you do not want to answer to me." The silence stretched. Then slowly the pack began to bow, not out of respect, Alara realized, out of fear. Kyle turned back to her and held out his hand. "Come." She stared at it. Her legs were still shaking. Her mind was still reeling, but she took his hand. He led her off the platform, through the crowd, toward the doors. No one spoke. No one moved. They just watched, eyes wide, mouths shut. Alara kept her head down, her bad leg dragging, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and shock. They stepped outside into the rain. Cale didn't stop. He kept walking, pulling her along until they reached a massive black carriage waiting at the edge of the square. 4 horses stood in harness, stamping and snorting. 2 guards flanked the door, both dressed in black, both armed. Kyle opened the door and gestured inside. "Get in." Alara hesitated. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere you can breathe without half the pack staring at you." She glanced back at the hall. Through the windows she could see faces pressed against the glass, watching. She climbed into the carriage. The interior was dark, lined with soft leather, warm despite the rain. Cale climbed in after her and shut the door. A moment later, the carriage lurched forward. Alara sat on the bench, hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor. Cale sat across from her, silent. The only sound was the rain drumming on the roof and the creak of wheels on wet stone. Finally, Alara spoke. "Why did you do that?" "Do what?" "Claim me. Defend me. You don't even know me." Kael leaned back, studying her. "I know enough. You know nothing. I know you're my mate. That doesn't mean anything." His eyes narrowed. "It means everything." Alara shook her head, her hands trembling. "You could have any woman you wanted, someone strong, someone whole, someone who isn't broken." Kael's voice was flat. "Is that what you were going to say?" She flinched. Kael leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Let me tell you something, Alara. I've met a lot of wolves in my life, strong ones, perfect ones, wolves who could fight and hunt and lead without hesitation. And most of them were weak. Do you know why?" She didn't answer. "Because they'd never been tested. They'd never had to choose between surviving and giving up. They'd never had to rebuild themselves from nothing." He paused. "You have. I saw it when you danced. You didn't perform. You fought. That's not broken. That's steel." Alara's throat tightened. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." His voice softened, just a fraction. "You think you're worthless because they told you that you were. But they're wrong. And I'm going to prove it." She looked up at him, her eyes burning. "How?" "By making you my queen." The words hung in the air. Alara laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're insane." "Probably." Kael's mouth twitched. "But the bond doesn't lie. You're mine. And I don't let go of what's mine." The carriage rolled to a stop. Kael stood and opened the door. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. They were no longer in the village. They were at the edge of the forest, where the road gave way to wilderness. A camp had been set up beneath the trees, tents, fires, guards moving in formation. It was military, precise, dangerous. Kael stepped out and offered his hand. Alara took it, her leg protesting as she climbed down. The ground was soft and muddy. She nearly slipped, but Kael steadied her. This way. He led her through the camp. Wolves stopped and stared, but none of them spoke. They moved with the same cold efficiency as their alpha, silent, disciplined, deadly. Kael brought her to the largest tent at the center. He held the flap open. You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we leave for the capital. Alara froze. The capital? My territory. My home. Where you belong now. I can't just leave. Yes, you can. Kael's tone left no room for argument. There's nothing for you here. You said it yourself. She wanted to argue, wanted to fight. But he was right. There was nothing left for her in Mistvale Hollow. She stepped inside the tent. It was warm, dry. A bed had been set up in the corner, piled with furs. A small brazier glowed in the center. It was more luxury than she'd seen in 2 years. Kael lingered at the entrance. Rest, eat. I'll have someone bring you food. Wait. He stopped. Alara turned to face him, her heart pounding. Why me? Really? I need to know. Kael was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because when I saw you dance, I saw someone who refused to die, and I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who are already dead inside. Before she could respond, he was gone. Alara stood there, alone, staring at the closed tent flap. Then her legs gave out, and she sank onto the bed, her face in her hands, and finally, let herself fall apart. She didn't sleep. She lay on the furs, staring at the ceiling of the tent, listening to the sounds of the camp outside. Footsteps, low voices, the crackle of fires. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt heavy and wet. Her mind wouldn't stop racing. Mate, queen, leave. It was too much, too fast. A soft knock on the tent pole made her sit up. Come in. A young woman entered carrying a tray. She was small, dark-haired, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. She set the tray on the table beside the bed. Bread, cheese, dried meat, a cup of something hot and herbal. High Alpha said you'd need this. Thank you. The woman nodded and turned to leave. Wait, Alara said. What's your name? The woman paused. Rhea. Are you part of his guard? I'm his second-in-command sister. I run logistics for the camp. Rhea's eyes flicked over Alara, assessing. You're the mate. I guess. You don't sound sure. Alara laughed weakly. I'm not. Rhea tilted her head. He doesn't make mistakes. There's a first time for everything. Not with him. Rhea crossed her arms. I've known Kael Draven for 10 years. I've seen him kill men for looking at him wrong. I've seen him burn entire villages that defied him. But I've never seen him claim a mate. If he says you're his, you are. Alara swallowed. That's what scares me. Rhea's expression softened, just a fraction. It should, but not because he'll hurt you. Because he'll destroy anyone who tries. She left before Alara could respond. Alara stared at the food. Her stomach was in knots, but she forced herself to eat. She needed strength. Whatever was coming, she couldn't face it on an empty stomach. When she finished, she lay back down and closed her eyes. This time, she slept. She woke to shouting. Alara bolted upright, her heart pounding. Outside the tent, voices were raised, angry, urgent. She scrambled to her feet and limped to the entrance, pulling the flap aside. The camp was in chaos. Wolves were gathered in a tight circle near the center, their faces twisted with anger. Kael stood in the middle, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. Beside him was a man Alara didn't recognize, older, scarred, with a commander's bearing, and on the ground, kneeling in the mud, was Torin. Alara's breath caught. You think I don't know what you said? Kael's voice was deadly quiet. You think word doesn't travel? Torin's face was pale, his hands bound behind his back. Hi, Alpha, I swear, I didn't mean... You called her a cripple. You laughed when she was dragged to the platform. You mocked her in front of the entire pack. I was just following orders. Whose orders? Torin hesitated. Kael crouched down eye level with him. I'll ask one more time. Whose? Orders. Elder Marin, Torin whispered. She said to make sure Alara Vane was brought forward. She said it would... It would prove a point. Cale's jaw tightened. He stood and looked at the scarred man beside him. Gareth, send word to the elders. Tell them I want Marin here. Now. Gareth nodded and disappeared into the darkness. Cale turned back to Torin. You humiliated my mate. You hurt her. Do you know what the penalty for that is? Torin was shaking. Please, High Alpha. I asked you a question. Death, Torin choked out. The penalty is death. That's right. Cale drew a blade from his belt, long, curved, gleaming in the firelight. Alara's stomach dropped. She stepped forward, her leg nearly buckling beneath her. Stop. Every head turned. Cale's eyes locked on her. Go back inside. No. Alara, oh, don't kill him. Cale's expression didn't change. He disrespected you. I know, but killing him won't fix that. It will send a message. It will make you a monster. Alara limped closer, her voice shaking. I've been powerless my whole life. I know what it feels like, and I know that killing someone who is just following orders won't make me feel powerful. It'll just make me like them. Cale stared at her for a long moment. Then he sheathed the blade. Fine. He looked down at Torin. You're banished. You have 1 hour to leave this territory. If I ever see you again, I'll finish this. Torin scrambled to his feet and ran. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring. Cale walked over to Alara, his face unreadable. You shouldn't have done that. Probably not. They'll see it as weakness. Let them. Cale's mouth twitched. You're going to be trouble, aren't you? You have no idea. For the first time he smiled. It was brief, barely there, but it was real. Get some rest, he said. We leave at dawn. He turned and walked away. Alara stood there, her heart still pounding, her hands still shaking. And then she saw movement at the edge of the camp. A figure, half hidden in shadow, watching her. Before she could get a closer look, it disappeared into the trees. Alara's blood ran cold. She limped back to the tent and shut the flap, her mind racing. Someone was out there, and they were watching. Alara didn't sleep again that night. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the tent flap, her mind replaying the figure in the shadows over and over. Someone had been watching her, someone who didn't want to be seen. The camp had gone quiet hours ago, but she could still hear the occasional footstep of a guard, the crackle of dying fires, the wind moving through the trees. Every sound made her flinch. When dawn finally broke, pale and gray through the canvas, she was already dressed. The tent flap opened without warning. Cale stepped inside, still dressed in black, his hair damp from the morning mist. He looked at her, then at the untouched furs on the bed. You didn't sleep. No? Why not? Alara hesitated. She didn't want to sound paranoid, didn't want to seem weak, but the fear was still there, coiled tight in her chest. I saw someone last night, at the edge of the camp, watching. Cale's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Man or woman? I don't know. It was too dark. Did they approach? No, they disappeared into the trees. Cale was silent for a moment. Then he turned and called out, Gareth! The scarred man appeared almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting just outside. Double the perimeter guards, Cale said. No one enters or leaves without my permission, and I want scouts in the forest. Someone was watching the camp last night. Gareth nodded and left. Cale turned back to Alara. You should have told me immediately. I didn't want to... His trouble? He stepped closer. You're my mate. Your safety is my priority. If you see something, you tell me. Understood? She nodded. Cale studied her for a moment longer, then gestured to the entrance. Come, we're breaking camp. Outside, the camp was already in motion. Tents were being dismantled, supplies packed, horses saddled. The efficiency was almost eerie. No one spoke unless necessary. No one wasted movement. It was like watching a machine. Alara stood near the carriage, trying to stay out of the way, her leg aching from standing too long. She watched the wolves work, their faces hard and closed, their eyes flicking toward her and then away, like she was something dangerous they didn't know how to handle. Rhea appeared beside her, carrying a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Here, she thrust it at Alara. For the journey, it's going to be a long ride. Alara unwrapped it, dried meat, hard bread, a flask of water, and a heavy wool cloak. Thank you. Rhea glanced around, then lowered her voice. You're making waves, you know. Half the camp thinks you're some kind of curse. The other half thinks Kael's lost his mind. Alara's stomach tightened. What do you think? Rhea shrugged. I think if Kael says you're his mate, then you are. But that doesn't mean this is going to be easy. The capital isn't like Mistvale Hollow. The wolves there are different, sharper, meaner. And they don't forgive weakness. I'm not weak. I know, but they don't. Rhea's eyes softened. Just watch your back. Not everyone's going to be happy about this. Before Alara could respond, a shout went up from the edge of the camp. Both women turned. A group of riders was approaching, 5 of them, moving fast, their horses kicking up mud. At the front was Elder Marin, her face grim, her cloak billowing behind her. Kael emerged from the command tent, his expression unreadable. Marin dismounted and strode toward him, flanked by 2 younger wolves Alara didn't recognize. She stopped a few feet away and inclined her head, barely. Hi, Alpha. You summoned me. I did. Kael's voice was cold. I want to know why you ordered Alara Vane to be brought forward yesterday, and why you told your sentries to humiliate her. Marin's jaw tightened. I did no such thing. Torin said otherwise. Torin is a liar and a coward. He was trying to save his own skin. He had no reason to lie. He was already condemned. Marin's eyes flashed. High Alpha, with all due respect, you cannot take the word of a disgraced sentry over mine. I am an elder of this pack. I have served for 30 years. And in those 30 years, you've let corruption fester. Kael stepped closer. You allowed a talented dancer to be cast aside because of an injury. You let her be mocked and degraded. You stood by while your pack destroyed one of its own. That's not leadership. That's cowardice. Marin's face flushed. She was unfit to serve. She was injured. There's a difference. She couldn't perform the sacred rites. So you erased her. Kael's voice dropped to a whisper. You threw her away like garbage. And when I asked to see all the trained dancers, you tried to hide her. Why? Marin's mouth opened, closed. Kael waited. Finally, Marin said, because she was an embarrassment, a reminder of failure. We couldn't afford to show weakness in front of the High Alpha. So you chose to show cruelty instead. Marin's hands clenched into fists. You don't understand. This pack has standards, traditions. We cannot lower them just because someone suffers a setback. A setback? Alara's voice rang out across the camp before she could stop herself. Everyone turned. She stepped forward, her leg dragging, her hands shaking. She didn't care. She was done being silent. You call shattering my leg a setback? Her voice was rough, raw. You call being abandoned by my mate, cast out by my pack, left to rot in the woods a setback? Marin's face went cold. You had your chance, Alara. You failed. That is not our fault. I fell. I didn't fail. There's a difference. You could no longer serve the pack, so you threw me away. Alara's voice cracked. I gave everything to this pack. I trained for years. I bled for those dances. And the moment I wasn't perfect, you erased me. You let them call me worthless. You let them forget I ever existed. Because you were worthless. Marin's voice was sharp, final. A wolf who cannot contribute is a burden. We don't carry dead weight. The camp went silent. Alara felt the words hit her like a punch to the gut. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Then Kael moved. He crossed the distance between himself and Marin in 3 strides, grabbed her by the throat, and lifted her off the ground. Marin choked, clawing at his hand. Say that again, Kael said softly. I want to make sure I heard you. Marin's face was turning purple. Kael's eyes were empty, dead. Hi, Alpha! One of the younger wolves stepped forward, hand on his blade. Gareth was there in an instant, his own blade at the wolf's throat. Don't! Kael didn't look away from Marin. You just called my mate worthless, to her face, in front of me. Do you have any idea what I do to people who insult what's mine? Marin made a strangled sound. Kael leaned closer. I could kill you right now, snap your neck, leave your body for the crows, and no one would stop me, because you broke the most fundamental law of pack hierarchy. You disrespected your alpha's mate. He released her. Marin collapsed to the ground, gasping, clutching her throat. Kael looked down at her with contempt. But I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to do something worse. I'm stripping you of your title. You are no longer an elder. You have no authority, no standing. You're nothing." Marin's eyes went wide. "You can't." "I just did." Kael turned to the two wolves who had come with her. "Take her back to Mistvale Hollow. She's confined to her home until I decide what to do with her. If she resists, bind her." The wolves hesitated, then nodded. Marin staggered to her feet, her face twisted with rage and humiliation. "You'll regret this. The council won't stand for it." "The council answers to me." Kael's voice was flat. "And if they have a problem with it, they can come tell me themselves." Marin opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Alara, and the hatred in her eyes was so pure it made Alara's skin crawl. Then she turned and walked away, the two wolves trailing behind her. The camp remained silent. Kael turned to Alara. "Are you all right?" She nodded, even though she wasn't. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was racing. She felt like she might fall apart. Kael's expression softened, just a fraction. "Get in the carriage. We're leaving." "What about the rest of the pack? What if they—" "Let them try." Kael's eyes were hard again. "Anyone who wants to challenge me is welcome to, but they won't like how it ends." Alara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him this was too much, too fast, too dangerous, but the words wouldn't come. She limped to the carriage and climbed inside. A moment later, Kael followed. The door closed. The carriage lurched forward, and Mistvale Hollow disappeared behind them. What? The journey to the capital took 3 days. They traveled through dense forest, across rivers swollen with rain, over hills that seemed to go on forever. The landscape grew wilder the farther north they went, fewer villages, fewer roads, more wilderness. The trees were older here, taller, their branches tangled together overhead like a roof that blocked out the sky. Alara spent most of the time in the carriage, staring out the window, trying not to think, trying not to feel. Kael rode alongside the carriage on a massive black horse, leading the column of guards. He didn't speak to her much during the journey. He was always busy, issuing orders, checking the perimeter, dealing with scouts who rode in and out with reports. But every night when they stopped to make camp, he came to her tent. He didn't say much, just checked to make sure she had food, that she was warm, that she was safe. And then he left. It should have felt cold, distant, but somehow it didn't. On the third night, Rhea brought her dinner and sat down beside the fire. "We'll reach the capital tomorrow," she said, tearing off a piece of bread. "You ready?" "No." Rhea laughed. "Smart answer." Alara poked at the stew in her bowl. "What's it like, the capital?" "Big, cold, dangerous." Rhea chewed thoughtfully. "Kael's seat is called Blackstone Keep. It's built into the side of a mountain, all dark stone and iron gates. Very dramatic, very him." "And the people?" Rhea's expression darkened. "They're loyal to Kael, but that doesn't mean they'll be kind. A lot of them have been with him for years. They're used to a certain way of doing things. And you're not what they expected." "I know." "Do you?" Rhea looked at her. "Because I don't think you understand what you're walking into. Kael is the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. Maybe in all territories. People fear him, respect him, obey him, but they don't love him. And now he's bringing home a mate no one's ever heard of, from a backwater pack, with no title and no standing. They're going to test you." Alara's stomach twisted. "How?" "Every way they can. They'll watch how you walk, how you talk, how you handle yourself. They'll look for weakness, and if they find it, they'll exploit it." "So what am I supposed to do?" Rhea smiled grimly. "Survive." No. They reached Blackstone Keep just after noon the next day. Alara saw it from miles away, a massive fortress carved into the mountainside, all black stone and sharp edges, with towers that clawed at the sky. Smoke rose from chimneys, banners snapped in the wind, black with a silver wolf's head. It looked like something out of a nightmare. The carriage rolled through the outer gates, past rows of armed guards, into a courtyard the size of Mistvale Hollow's entire village center. Wolves were everywhere, training, talking, working. All of them stopped and stared as the carriage passed. Alara's hands were shaking again. The carriage stopped in front of a set of massive double doors. Kael dismounted and opened the carriage door, offering his hand. Alara took it and stepped down. The courtyard went silent. Every eye was on her. Kyle didn't seem to notice. He kept his hand on the small of her back and guided her toward the doors. They opened before he could reach them. A woman stepped out. Tall, elegant, dressed in dark gray silk, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was beautiful and cold, like a statue carved from ice. She looked at Kyle, then at Alara. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Hi, Alpha," she said, her voice smooth and measured. "Welcome home." "Lady Sienna," Kyle's tone was formal. "This is Alara Vane, Machet Titishi Sisenan. Eat my mate." Sienna's gaze swept over Alara, taking in the plain dress, the limp, the worn boots. "Your mate." She said it like she was tasting the words. How unexpected. "Prepare the North Tower for her," Kyle said. "She'll need quarters, a wardrobe, and a personal attendant." "Of course." Sienna's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Shall I also arrange for the council to meet? I'm sure they'll be eager to welcome her. Tomorrow. Tonight, we rest." Sienna inclined her head. "As you wish." She turned and walked back inside. Kale looked down at Alara. "Ignore her. She's always like that." "Who is she?" "My late father's advisor. She runs most of the keep's operations." He paused. "She's efficient, ruthless, and she doesn't like change." "So she hates me." "Probably." Alara laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Great." Kale's mouth twitched. "Come on, let me show you your rooms." He led her inside. The interior of Blackstone Keep was just as imposing as the exterior. High ceilings, stone walls, narrow windows that let in slivers of cold light. Everything was dark and sharp and unforgiving. They climbed a spiral staircase that seemed to go on forever. Alara's leg was screaming by the time they reached the top, but she didn't complain. Kyle opened a heavy wooden door and stepped aside. Alara limped inside and stopped. The room was enormous. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall draped in dark furs. A fireplace crackled on the opposite side. Tall windows overlooked the mountains. It was more space than she'd had in her entire life. "This is too much." "It's yours." Kyle crossed to the fireplace and added another log. "You'll have everything you need. If you want something, tell Rhea. She'll make sure you get it." Kale. He turned to face her. Alara took a breath. "Why are you doing this? Really? I know what you said about the bond, but this is more than that. You're making enemies for me. You're risking your authority." "Why?" Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I'm tired of pretending to be something I'm not. I've spent my entire life being the monster everyone expects. Ruthless, cold, unfeeling, and maybe I am those things. But when I saw you dance, I saw something I didn't think existed anymore." "What?" "Defiance." He stepped closer. "You were in pain. You were humiliated. You had every reason to walk away, but you didn't. You fought. And I realized something. I don't want someone who's perfect. I want someone who's real." Alara's throat tightened. Kyle reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was surprisingly gentle. "You're real, Alara, and that's more valuable than anything else." Before she could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. Kale's expression shifted instantly. Back to cold, back to controlled. "Come in." Gareth entered, his face grim. "We have a problem." Kale's jaw tightened. "What kind of problem?" "A messenger just arrived from the eastern border. One of the smaller packs is refusing to pay tribute. They're claiming you've lost your authority because you—" He glanced at Alara. "Because you chose an unworthy mate." The room went cold. Kyle's eyes were like ice. "Who?" "The Ironclaw Pack. Their alpha sent a formal challenge. He's demanding you prove your mate's worth in front of the council. If you refuse, he'll take it as a sign of weakness and rally the other packs against you." Alara's blood ran cold. "A challenge? What does that mean?" Gareth looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It means you have to prove you're fit to be the High Alpha's mate. Publicly. In front of every pack leader in the territory." "How?" Gareth didn't answer. Kale's voice was flat. "She has to dance." Alara's heart stopped. "No." The word came out as a whisper. "No, I can't."
You don't have a choice. Kael's face was carved from stone. If you refuse, they'll see it as proof that you're unworthy, and they'll use it to undermine my authority. I'll have to fight to hold my position. People will die. Then let me step aside. The bond doesn't work that way. Kael's voice was rough. We're mated. That's permanent. The only way out is death.
Alara felt the walls closing in. When? She managed. 3 days. Gareth's voice was quiet. The council is already gathering. Kael turned to him. Leave us. Gareth bowed and left. The door closed. Alara sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. I can't do this. I can't dance in front of them. I'll fail. I'll prove them right. Kael knelt in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. You're not going to fail. You're going to show them exactly what you showed me, that you're stronger than they'll ever be. I'm not strong. Yes, you are. His voice was fierce. You survived being broken. You survived being abandoned. You survived 2 years of hell. You think a room full of arrogant wolves is going to destroy you? You're already a survivor. Now you just have to prove it. Alara's eyes burned. What if I can't? Then we fight. Kael's grip tightened on her hands. Together. Well, for a moment, she let herself believe it. Then the fear came crashing back. I need to practice, she whispered. I need time. You have 3 days. I'll make sure you have everything you need. He stood and walked to the door. Kael. He stopped. If I do this, if I dance and I fail. Her voice broke. What happens to you? Kael's expression softened just for a moment. Don't worry about me. Just dance. He left. Alara sat there, alone, staring at the fire. 3 days. She had 3 days to prove she wasn't worthless. 3 days to become something she hadn't been in 2 years. 3 days to save the man who had given her everything. She looked down at her hands, scarred, trembling, imperfect, and then she stood. Her legs screamed in protest, but she ignored it. She crossed to the center of the room, pushed the furniture aside, and began to move. It hurt. Every step was agony. Every turn sent fire shooting up her leg. Her balance was off. Her body was weak, but she didn't stop. She danced through the pain, danced through the fear, danced until her legs gave out and she collapsed on the floor, gasping, tears streaming down her face. And then she got up and danced again. 3 days later, Alara stood at the entrance to the Grand Council Hall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might shatter. The hall was massive, 3 times the size of Mistvale Hollow's gathering place. Stone pillars rose to a vaulted ceiling, torches burned in iron sconces, and filling the space were wolves, hundreds of them, pack leaders, elders, warriors, all of them watching, waiting. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, sat Kael. He was dressed in formal black, a silver circlet resting on his dark hair, the crown of the High Alpha. Beside him sat the council, 12 wolves, each representing a different territory, and at the center of the floor was a circular platform, the same platform she would have to dance on. Alara's hands were shaking so badly she had to clench them into fists to hide it. Rhea stood beside her, dressed in ceremonial gray. She leaned close and whispered, "You can do this. Just remember, you're not dancing for them. You're dancing for you." Alara nodded, even though she didn't believe it. A horn sounded. The hall fell silent. Kael stood. His voice rang out, cold and commanding. 3 days ago, Alpha Corvon of the Ironclaw Pack issued a formal challenge. He claimed my mate was unworthy. Tonight, she will prove him wrong. He gestured to the platform. Alara Vane, step forward. Alara's legs moved before her mind caught up. She walked down the center aisle, her limp pronounced, her breathing shallow. Every eye followed her. She could hear the whispers, soft, cruel, cutting. Look at her. She can barely walk. This is what he chose? She reached the platform and climbed the steps. Her leg nearly gave out halfway up, but she caught herself. The crowd murmured. She stood in the center, alone, exposed. Kael's eyes were on her, unreadable, unyielding. The music started. Low drums, a mournful flute, the same rhythm that had haunted her for 2 years. Alara closed her eyes and let the fear consume her. Then she turned it into fire. She danced. Not the perfect sacred movements they expected. She danced rage, danced survival, danced every broken piece of herself. Her leg dragged. Her balance faltered. She stumbled twice. But she didn't stop. She turned her limp into a weapon, her pain into poetry. And somewhere in the middle of it, she stopped dancing for them. She danced for the girl who had fallen, for the woman who had survived, for herself. When the music ended, she stood there, shaking, gasping, her bad leg barely holding her up. The hall was silent. Then Kael rose. He walked down from the dais across the floor and climbed onto the platform. He stopped in front of her and took her hand. The bond flared between them, bright and undeniable. Kael turned to the council. Anyone still thinks she's unworthy? Silence. Alpha Corvon stood, a massive wolf with graying hair and cold eyes. She's a cripple. She has no strength. She has more strength than you'll ever understand. Kael's voice was deadly. She danced with a shattered leg. She survived being cast aside. She endured 2 years of hell and still stands here, defiant. That's not weakness. That's steel. Corvin's face twisted. You're blinded by the bond. The bond doesn't lie. Kael's eyes were ice. She's my mate, my equal. And if you challenge her again, you challenge me. Corvin's jaw tightened. Then he sat down. Kael looked at the rest of the council. Anyone else? No one spoke. Kael turned back to Alara and pulled her close, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You did it. Alara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She'd done it. She'd survived. Then the doors at the back of the hall burst open. A guard stumbled in, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Hi, Alpha, he gasped. We're under attack. The guard collapsed to one knee, blood dripping onto the stone floor. His breathing came in ragged gasps, his eyes wide with panic. Who? Kael's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Ironclaw. 200 wolves, maybe more. They breached the eastern gate. The rest of his words were drowned out by the eruption of sound in the hall. Wolves leapt to their feet, shouting, reaching for weapons. The council dissolved into chaos. Kael didn't move. He stood perfectly still on the platform, his hand still gripping Alara's, his face carved from stone. Then he turned to Gareth, who had already appeared at the base of the platform, sword drawn. Seal the inner keep. Get the non-combatants to the lower levels. I want every available fighter on the walls in 5 minutes. Gareth nodded and vanished into the crowd. Kael looked at Alara. You need to go. Now. What? No? This isn't a debate. His grip on her hand tightened. Rhea will take you to the safe room. You'll be protected there. I'm not hiding while you... Oh, you are. His voice was flat, final. I can't fight if I'm worried about you. Please. The word hung between them. Alara had never heard him say please before. She nodded even though everything in her screamed to stay. Kael released her hand and turned to face the hall. His voice rang out, cutting through the noise. All pack leaders, to the war room, now. Everyone else defend your posts. This ends tonight. He stepped off the platform and strode toward the doors, wolves parting before him like water. Rhea grabbed Alara's arm. Come on, we need to move. Alara let herself be pulled through the chaos, her legs screaming in protest. They pushed through the crowd, down a narrow corridor, past guards rushing in the opposite direction. The sounds of battle were already echoing through the keep. Shouts, the clash of steel, something heavy slamming into stone. Rhea shoved open a door and dragged Alara inside. The room was small, windowless, lit by a single torch. A dozen women and children were already huddled inside, their faces pale with fear. Stay here, Rhea said. Don't open the door for anyone except me or Kael. Understood? Alara nodded. Rhea turned to leave. Wait. Alara caught her arm. Be careful. Rhea's mouth twitched into something almost like a smile. You too. Then she was gone. The door slammed shut. The heavy bar dropped into place. Alara stood there, breathing hard, her hands shaking. Around her, the women and children whispered to each other in frightened voices. A little girl was crying softly in her mother's arms. Alara limped to the corner and sank to the floor, pressing her back against the cold stone. She could still hear the fighting, distant but growing closer. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. Minutes passed like hours. The sounds of battle grew louder, closer. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. Alara's eyes snapped open. The silence was worse than the noise. She pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the protest from her leg, and moved to the door, pressed her ear against the wood. Nothing. Just her own heartbeat, pounding in her ears. Then she heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. Everyone in the room went still. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Someone knocked. 3 short raps. One of the women whimpered. Alara's throat tightened. Ria had said not to open the door for anyone except her or Kael, but what if it was them? What if they needed help? The knock came again, harder this time. Open up. A man's voice, rough, unfamiliar. Not Kael, not Ria. Alara's heart slammed against her ribs. I know you're in there, the voice continued. The High Alpha's mate, Alara Vane. I have a message for you. Alara didn't move. Open the door or I'll break it down. Your choice. One of the women stood, her face pale. We have to. No. Alara's voice was sharp. We don't. But if they break in, then we fight. The woman stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. Alara looked around the room. There were no weapons. Nothing but frightened people and cold stone. Her eyes landed on the torch. She crossed to it and yanked it from its bracket. The flame flickered, but held. Everyone get behind me, she said. No one moved. Now! They scrambled to obey. Alara faced the door, torch raised, her bad leg braced against the floor. The man outside laughed. Brave. Stupid, but brave. This would be easier if you just... The door exploded inward. Alara stumbled back, barely keeping her feet. The torch slipped in her grip, but she held on. 3 wolves poured into the room, large, scarred, weapons drawn. The one in front was massive, his face twisted in a grin. There you are. Alara swung the torch. The man jerked back, the flame missing his face by inches. He laughed again. You're going to fight me with a stick? If I have to. He stepped closer. Corvin wants you alive. Says you're leverage. But he didn't say you had to be unharmed. Alara's grip tightened on the torch. Touch me and Kael will rip you apart. The High Alpha's a little busy right now. Won't be coming to save you. He lunged. Alara swung again, but he was faster than she expected. He caught her wrist, twisted, and the torch clattered to the floor. Pain shot up her arm. She tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. He yanked her forward, his other hand reaching for her throat. Then a blade burst through his chest. The man's eyes went wide. Blood bubbled at his lips. He dropped. Behind him stood Lady Sienna, holding a sword slick with red, her silver hair disheveled, her face cold and calm. Get away from her, Sienna said quietly. The other 2 wolves hesitated. Sienna moved like water, fast, precise, lethal. Her blade flashed. One wolf went down with his throat opened. The other tried to run. He didn't make it 3 steps before Sienna's sword took him through the spine. Silence fell. Sienna lowered her blade and looked at Alara. Her expression was unreadable. Are you hurt? Alara shook her head, unable to speak. Sienna glanced at the bodies on the floor, then at the huddled women and children. Stay here. Bar the door after I leave. Don't open it again unless you hear my voice or the High Alphas. Wait, Alara found her voice. Why did you help me? Sienna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Because you danced. Before Alara could respond, Sienna was gone. The door slammed shut. The bar dropped into place. Alara stood there, shaking, staring at the blood spreading across the floor. Someone behind her was crying. She turned and saw the little girl from earlier, her face buried in her mother's shoulder. Alara limped over and knelt down, wincing as her leg protested. It's okay, she whispered. You're safe now. The little girl looked up at her, tears streaming down her face. Are the bad men gone? Alara glanced at the bodies. Yes, they're gone. Are you scared? Alara smiled even though her hands were still shaking. Terrified. The little girl's mother pulled her close. Thank you for standing between us and them. Alara nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. She stood and moved back to the corner, sinking to the floor. Her leg was on fire. Her wrist throbbed where the man had grabbed her. Her whole body felt like it was coming apart. But she was alive. They were all alive. She closed her eyes and waited. The sounds of battle continued for what felt like hours. Sometimes close, sometimes distant. Alara lost track of time, lost track of everything except the cold stone against her back and the pounding of her heart. Then, finally, silence. Real silence. Footsteps approached the door again. Alara tensed, her hand reaching for the fallen torch. Alara, Kael's voice rough and tired. Open the door. Relief hit her so hard she nearly collapsed. The women scrambled to lift the bar. The door swung open. Kael stood there, covered in blood. None of it his, she realized. His face was hard, his eyes scanning the room until they found her. Then his expression shifted. He crossed to her in 3 strides, dropped to one knee, and pulled her into his arms. Alara buried her face in his shoulder and finally let herself break. She didn't cry, she just held on, shaking, while Kael's hand pressed against the back of her head. You're safe, he murmured. I've got you. After a moment, he pulled back and looked at the bodies on the floor. His jaw tightened. Who killed them? Sienna. Kael's eyebrows rose. Sienna? She came in, killed them, and left. She told me to stay here. Kael was silent for a moment. Then he stood and helped Alara to her feet. Come on, it's over. Over? Corvin's dead. His wolves surrendered. The ones who didn't are being hunted down as we speak. Alara stared at him. You killed him? Yes. Kael's voice was flat. He tried to use you as leverage. Thought if he could capture you, I'd surrender. He was wrong. He led her out of the room, his arm around her waist, supporting her weight. The corridors were littered with debris. Broken weapons, shattered stone, blood. Wolves moved through the halls, clearing bodies, tending to the wounded. They all stopped and stared when they saw Kael and Alara. Kael didn't acknowledge them. He just kept walking. They reached the main hall. The platform where Alara had danced was still standing, untouched, surrounded by chaos. The council was gathered again, their faces grim. Kael stopped in the center of the hall and addressed them. Ironclaw Pack is no more. Their territory is forfeit. Their surviving wolves will be absorbed into other packs or exiled. Does anyone have a problem with that? No one spoke. Kael's eyes swept over them. Good. Then let me make one more thing clear. This attack happened because Alpha Corvan thought my mate was a weakness he could exploit. He thought wrong, and anyone else who makes the same mistake will end up the same way he did. He turned to Alara, his expression softening just a fraction. She's not my weakness. She's my strength. And from this moment forward, anyone who disrespects her answers to me personally. The hall was silent. Then one of the council members stood, an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. Hi, Alpha, she said slowly. We owe your mate an apology. Kael's expression didn't change. Go on. The woman looked at Alara. We judged you without knowing you. We saw your injury and assumed weakness, but you stood your ground tonight. You protected the vulnerable. You showed courage when most would have hidden. She paused. That is the mark of a true queen. Another council member stood, then another. One by one they rose, and one by one they bowed. Not out of fear this time. Out of respect. Alara's throat tightened. She couldn't speak. Kael's hand found hers and squeezed. Thank you, he said to the council. That will be all. They filed out, leaving Kael and Alara alone in the hall. Alara looked up at him. I don't understand what just happened. Kael smiled, a real smile, small and rare and genuine. You proved them wrong, all of them. I didn't do anything. You survived. You fought. You stood between them and danger, even though you were terrified. That's everything. Alara shook her head. I'm not a queen. Not yet. Kael's thumb brushed over her knuckles. But you will be. Before she could respond, Rhea appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with dirt and blood. We've secured the perimeter. No more hostiles in the keep. Casualties are being counted now. Kael nodded. Good. Send word to the other packs. I want everyone to know what happened here tonight. I want them to understand the cost of challenging me. Rhea glanced at Alara, then back at Kael. There's something else. We found evidence that Corvan didn't act alone. He had inside help. Kael's expression went cold. Who? We're still investigating, but whoever it was knew the layout of the keep, knew our defenses. This was planned. Kael's jaw tightened. Find them. I don't care how long it takes. Find them and bring them to me. Rhea bowed and left. Kael looked down at Alara. You need rest. I need answers. Alara's voice was sharper than she intended. Someone inside the keep helped Corvan, someone who wanted you dead, or wanted me dead, or both. And we don't know who. I'll handle it. No. Alara pulled her hand from his. You can't just send me away every time something dangerous happens. If I'm going to be your mate, your queen, then I need to be part of this. All of it. Kael stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, You're right. Alara blinked. What? You're right. I've been trying to protect you by keeping you out of it, but that's not fair to you. And it's not smart. You see things I don't. You understand people in ways I never will. He paused. I need you, not just as my mate, as my partner. Alara's chest tightened. Kael held out his hand. So, partners? She took it. Partners. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. We're going to find whoever did this, he said quietly, and we're going to make sure they never threaten us again. Together. Together. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Alara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next morning, Alara woke to sunlight streaming through the tall windows of her room. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot everything that had happened. Then her leg throbbed, and it all came rushing back. She sat up slowly, wincing. Her body was a mess of bruises and aches. But she was alive. Someone had cleaned her up while she slept. Her face was washed, her hair brushed, her torn dress replaced with a soft nightgown. A knock on the door made her tense. Come in. Sienna entered, carrying a tray. She set it on the table beside the bed, tea, bread, fruit. High Alpha thought you might be hungry. Alara stared at her. You saved my life last night. Sienna's expression didn't change. I did what was necessary. Why? Sienna was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down in the chair by the window, her posture perfect, her hands folded in her lap. When the High Alpha's father died, I thought this place would fall apart. Kael was young, angry, ruthless. I didn't think he'd last a year. She paused. But he proved me wrong. He held this territory together through sheer will. He became the most powerful alpha in the north. And he did it alone. She looked at Alara. When he claimed you as his mate, I thought he'd made a mistake. I thought you were a weakness, a liability. Sienna's mouth twitched. But then you danced, and I realized something. You're not his weakness. You're the only thing that makes him human. Alara's throat tightened. Sienna stood. So yes, I saved your life, because if you die, he becomes the monster everyone fears, and this territory can't survive that. She turned to leave. Sienna. The woman paused. Thank you. Sienna inclined her head. Don't make me regret it. She left. Alara sat there, staring at the closed door. Then she stood, ignoring the protest from her leg, and dressed. She wasn't going to hide in this room while Kael dealt with everything alone. Not anymore. She made her way down to the main hall, moving slowly, her hand braced against the wall. Wolves passed her in the corridors, and this time they didn't look away. They nodded. Some even bowed. It was strange, unsettling, but not unwelcome. She found Kael in the war room, bent over a map, Gareth and Rhea on either side of him. He looked up when she entered. You should be resting. I'm fine. She limped to the table and looked down at the map. What did you find? Kael exchanged a glance with Gareth. We tracked the insiders' movements. Whoever helped Corvan knew exactly when the council would be gathered, knew which gates would be vulnerable, knew where you'd be taken for safety. Alara's stomach twisted. So it's someone close. Very close. Kael's jaw tightened. Someone in the keep.
someone we trust.
Rhea pointed to a section of the map. We found evidence of communication between the Keep and Ironclaw territory. Letters, coded messages. Whoever it was has been planning this for months. Do we have a name? Not yet, but we're close. Kyle looked at Alara. When we find them, I want you there. I want you to see what happens to people who betray us. Alara nodded. A guard burst into the room, breathing hard. High Alpha, we found something. You need to see this. They followed him down to the lower levels, into a storage room that smelled of damp stone and old wood. In the corner, hidden behind crates, was a small chest. Gareth pried it open. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Cale picked one up and read it, his face going cold. What is it? Alara asked. Kyle handed it to her. The letter was written in a careful, elegant hand. It detailed the layout of the keep, the guard rotations, the council's schedule, and at the bottom, a signature. Alara's blood ran cold. Marin. It was her, she whispered. She was working with Corvin. She wanted you dead. Kael's expression was carved from ice. Where is she? Gareth stepped forward. Still in Mistvale Hollow, confined to her home, as you ordered. Not anymore. Kael's voice was deadly. Bring her here, now. Gareth bowed and left. Kael looked at Alara. You were right to stop me from killing her the first time, but I won't make that mistake again. Alara nodded. She didn't feel guilty. Marin had tried to destroy them both. Now she would answer for it. 2 days later, Marin was dragged into the hall in chains. She looked smaller than Alara remembered, older, broken. Kael stood on the dais, Alara beside him, the entire council watching. Marin of Mistvale Hollow, Kael said, his voice echoing through the hall. You stand accused of treason, of conspiring with Alpha Corvon to overthrow my authority, of attempting to assassinate my mate. How do you plead? Marin lifted her head, her eyes blazing with defiance. I did what was necessary. You were destroying everything we built. You chose a cripple over the strength of the packs. Enough. Kael's voice was flat. I asked how you plead, guilty or not guilty. Marin spat at his feet. Guilty, and I'd do it again. The hall erupted. Kael raised his hand. Silence fell. Then you leave me no choice. He looked at Gareth. Take her to the execution platform. At dawn, she dies. Marin laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You think killing me will change anything? There are others who see what you've become. A lovesick fool, blinded by a bond to a worthless... Alara stepped forward. Say it, she said quietly. Finish that sentence. Marin's mouth twisted into a sneer. Worthless cripple. Alara didn't flinch. She walked down from the dais, her bad leg dragging, and stopped in front of Marin. You spent your whole life building walls, Alara said, deciding who was worthy, who deserved to be seen, who deserved to survive. And when I didn't fit your perfect vision, you threw me away. You let me suffer. You let me think I was nothing. Marin's eyes narrowed. Alara leaned closer. But you were wrong. I'm not worthless. I'm not a burden. I'm the High Alpha's mate, his queen. And you're nothing. She turned and walked back to the dais. Kael was watching her, something fierce and proud in his eyes. Marin screamed as the guards dragged her away. The hall was silent. Then Kael spoke. Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can challenge what we've built. This territory is stronger now than it's ever been, and it will only get stronger. He took Alara's hand and raised it. Alara Vane is my mate, my queen, and she has proven herself worthy 100 times over. Anyone who doubts that can leave now, or answer to me. No one moved. Kael's grip tightened on her hand. Then it settled. The council rose and bowed, and this time, when they looked at Alara, there was no doubt in their eyes. Only respect. The morning Marin was executed, Alara didn't watch. She stood in her room, looking out the window toward the mountains, listening to the distant sound of drums, the ceremonial beat that marked the end of a traitor's life. It was quick, clinical. Kael had told her it would be merciful, a single blade, a swift death. Marin didn't deserve mercy, but Alara wasn't like her. She closed her eyes when the drums stopped, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything she'd ever carried. Behind her, the door opened. She didn't turn. She knew his footsteps by now. Kyle crossed the room and stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. He didn't speak, just stood there, solid and quiet, while the world settled into a new shape around them. Finally, Alara said, "Is it done?" "Yes." She nodded. "Good." Kyle glanced at her. "Are you all right?" "I don't know." She turned to face him. "I should feel something, shouldn't I? Relief, satisfaction, something. But I just feel empty." Kale reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "That's because you're not like them. You don't find joy in death, even when it's deserved. Maybe I should." "No." His voice was firm. "That's what makes you different. That's what makes you better." Alara looked up at him. "You keep saying that, but I don't feel better. I feel like I'm barely holding myself together." "You are holding yourself together. That's the point." Kale's thumb traced the line of her jaw. "You've been through hell. You've been broken and discarded and attacked, and you're still standing. That's not weakness. That's strength." Alara's throat tightened. "I'm tired of being strong." "I know." Kale pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore." She buried her face in his chest and let herself breathe. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself rest. The weeks that followed were strange. Alara had expected more challenges, more threats, more tests of her worth. But instead, the territory settled into a fragile peace. The packs that had questioned Kael's choice fell silent. The council stopped looking at her like a problem to be solved. And slowly, carefully, Alara began to build something she'd never had before. A place. Kael gave her authority over the eastern territories, the smaller packs that had been neglected under his father's rule. He told her it was because she understood what it was like to be overlooked, to be forgotten. She thought it was because he trusted her. She threw herself into the work. She traveled to the outlying villages, met with pack leaders, listened to their grievances. Most of them were small things, disputes over hunting grounds, arguments about resources, families struggling to survive harsh winters, things that Kael had never had time for. But Alara did. She sat with them, listened, found solutions that didn't involve bloodshed or dominance. She redistributed supplies, negotiated agreements, gave people a voice they hadn't had in years, and slowly they started to trust her. Rhea traveled with her, along with a small guard. At first, Alara had protested the guards. She didn't need protection, didn't want to seem weak. But Kael had been firm. "You're my mate, my queen. That makes you a target. The guards stay." So they stayed. And Alara learned to live with it. One afternoon, 3 months after Marin's execution, Alara sat in a small village hall in the eastern foothills, listening to an older woman complain about a neighboring pack stealing from her family's traps. "They've been doing it for months," the woman said, her voice shaking with anger. "And every time we complain, they say we can't prove it. But we know. We know it's them." Lara listened, then looked at the leader of the accused pack, a younger man with sharp eyes and a defensive posture. "Is it true?" she asked. "No, we hunt our own grounds. We don't need to steal." "Then you won't mind if I inspect your stores." The man's jaw tightened. "That's an invasion of—" "I'm not asking." Alara's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "I'm the High Alpha's mate. I have authority here. You can cooperate, or I can bring this to Kael. Your choice." The man hesitated. Then he nodded. An hour later, Alara stood in the man's storage shed, looking at furs and meat that clearly didn't come from his territory. "You lied," she said quietly. The man's face flushed. "We were desperate. I don't care." Alara turned to face him. "Desperation doesn't justify theft. You took from people who had even less than you. That's not survival. That's cruelty." "What are you going to do?" Alara considered. "You're going to return everything you stole. And you're going to apologize. And then you're going to work with the other pack to share resources so this doesn't happen again." The man stared at her. "That's it?" "That's it. Unless you'd prefer I bring this to the High Alpha, I'm sure he'd have a more permanent solution." The man paled. No, I'll do it. Thank you." Alara nodded and walked out. Rhea was waiting outside, leaning against a tree, a small smile on her face. You're getting good at this. Alara shrugged. I'm just doing what makes sense. That's more than most people in your position would do. Rhea pushed off the tree. You know, when Kael first brought you here, I thought you'd be dead within a month, either from the pressure or from someone trying to take you out. Thanks for the vote of confidence. I'm serious. Rhea's expression softened. But you've proven me wrong. You've proven everyone wrong. You're not just surviving, you're thriving. Alara looked out at the village, at the people going about their lives, at the mountains rising in the distance. I'm trying, she said quietly. That's all anyone can do. That night, back at Blackstone Keep, Alara found Kael in his study, bent over reports, his face tired. She knocked on the open door. He looked up, and his expression immediately softened. You're back. I'm back. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of his desk. How was your day? Long, boring, full of people complaining about things that don't matter. He leaned back in his chair. How was yours? I caught a thief, negotiated a resource-sharing agreement, and convinced 2 packs not to kill each other over a boundary dispute. Kael's mouth twitched. So, an easy day. Compared to dancing in front of the council while being called a cripple? Yes, easy. Kael laughed. A real laugh, low and genuine. It was a sound Alara had come to treasure. He reached out and pulled her into his lap. She went willingly, curling against him. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. Alara looked up at him. For what? For everything, for surviving, for becoming the queen this territory needs, for proving that strength isn't about being perfect, it's about refusing to give up. Alara's chest tightened. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. Kael's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together. But I'm glad you didn't have to. They sat there in silence, the fire crackling in the hearth, the world outside quiet and still. Then Kael said, There's something I need to tell you. Alara tensed. What? The council wants to hold a formal coronation. They want to officially recognize you as queen. Alara's heart skipped. What? You've been acting as queen for months now, but they want to make it official. A ceremony. In front of all the packs. But Kael, You don't have to decide now, he said quickly. But think about it, please. Alara stared at him. You want this. I want you to have the recognition you deserve. I want everyone to see what I see, that you're not just my mate. You're a leader, a queen. Alara's throat burned. What if I fail? You won't. You don't know that. Kael cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. I know you. I know your strength. I know your heart. You won't fail because you don't know how to give up. It's not in you. Alara closed her eyes and let his words sink in. Then she nodded. Okay, let's do it. Kael smiled, that rare, genuine smile that made her forget how dangerous he was. Together? Together. The coronation was set for the winter solstice, 6 weeks away. The council sent word to every pack in the northern territories, summoning them to Blackstone Keep for the ceremony. Alara spent those 6 weeks in a haze of preparation. There were fittings for ceremonial robes, meetings with advisors, rehearsals for the ritual itself. It was overwhelming, exhausting, but she didn't complain. Because buried beneath the fear and the pressure, there was something else. Pride. She was going to be queen, not because she was perfect, not because she fit some impossible standard, because she had survived. The night before the coronation, Alara couldn't sleep. She stood on the balcony of her room, wrapped in a heavy fur cloak, watching snow fall over the mountains. The world was silent and white and impossibly beautiful. She heard footsteps behind her but didn't turn. Kael stepped onto the balcony and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. Can't sleep? No. Nervous? Terrified. Kael chuckled. Good. If you weren't nervous, I'd be worried. Alara leaned back against him. What if they don't accept me? They will. But what if... Alara. Kael turned her to face him. Tomorrow, you're going to walk into that hall, and you're going to stand in front of every pack leader in the north. And some of them will still doubt you.
Some of them will still think you're unworthy, but you're going to prove them wrong, just like you've been doing since the moment I met you. Alara's eyes burned. How are you so sure? Because I've seen you fight. I've seen you bleed.
I've seen you stand when anyone else would have fallen. You're already a queen. Tomorrow just makes it official.
Alara kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and full of everything she couldn't put into words. When they finally pulled apart, Kael rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said quietly. It was the first time he'd said it. Alara's breath caught. I love you too. They stood there, wrapped in each other, while the snow fell around them and the world waited for tomorrow. The grand hall had been transformed. Torches burned in every sconce. Banners hung from the rafters, black and silver, the colors of the High Alpha's house. And filling the space were wolves, hundreds of them, from every pack in the territory, all dressed in ceremonial furs and armor. Alara stood at the entrance, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She wore robes of deep gray silk, embroidered with silver thread, a cloak of white fur draped over her shoulders. Her hair was loose, falling in waves down her back. She looked like a queen. She felt like a fraud. Rhea stood beside her, dressed in formal black. You ready? No? Good. Let's go. The doors opened. The hall fell silent. Alara stepped inside. Every eye turned to her. She kept her head up, her shoulders back, her bad leg moving as smoothly as she could manage. She didn't look at the crowd. Didn't let herself think about what they were seeing. She just walked. At the far end of the hall, on the raised dais, Kael stood waiting. He was dressed in black and silver, the crown of the High Alpha resting on his head. He looked like something out of legend, and he was smiling. Alara reached the dais and climbed the steps. Her leg protested, but she ignored it. Kael held out his hand. She took it. The crowd murmured. Kael turned to face them, his voice ringing out across the hall. We are gathered here to witness the coronation of Alara Vane as Queen of the Northern Territories. She has proven herself through trial and fire. She has shown strength, courage, and wisdom, and she has earned the right to stand beside me as my equal. He turned to one of the elders, who stepped forward carrying a second crown, smaller than Kael's, made of twisted silver shaped like branches. Kael took it and turned to Alara. Kneel. Alara hesitated. Then she knelt, her bad legs screaming in protest. Kael placed the crown on her head. Rise, Alara Vane, Queen of the North. Alara stood. The hall erupted, not with protest, not with doubt, with applause. It started slowly, then built, until the sound was deafening. Wolves rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, stamping their feet. Alara stared at them, her eyes burning, her throat tight. They were cheering for her. Kael leaned close and whispered, I told you. Alara laughed, a short, breathless sound, and wiped at her eyes. Then Kael turned her to face the crowd and raised her hand. You're queen! The cheers grew louder, and for the first time in her life, Alara felt like she belonged. The celebration lasted late into the night. There was food, music, dancing. Wolves from every pack mingled, drinking and laughing, the old tensions forgotten, at least for tonight. Alara moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, making small talk, playing the role she'd been given. But eventually she slipped away. She found herself back on the platform where she'd first danced for Kael. The hall had emptied out, most of the guests having moved to the outer courtyards. It was quiet here, peaceful. She stood in the center of the platform and closed her eyes. She thought about the girl she'd been 2 years ago, broken, discarded, convinced she was worthless. That girl was gone. And in her place was someone stronger, someone who had survived the impossible, someone who had become a queen. You always end up here, a voice said. Alara opened her eyes. Sienna stood at the edge of the platform, her expression unreadable. I was just thinking, Alara said. About? How far I've come. Sienna stepped onto the platform. You've done well. Better than I expected. High praise from you. Sienna's mouth twitched. Don't let it go to your head. Alara smiled. Then she said, Thank you. For everything. I know we didn't start off well, but you've helped me more than you know. Sienna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You remind me of someone. Who? Kale's mother. Sienna's eyes were distant. She was kind, strong, loved by everyone, and she died far too young. I thought we'd never see her like again. She looked at Ilara. I was wrong. Ilara's chest tightened. Sienna inclined her head. Long live the queen. Then she walked away. Ilara stood there alone, the weight of the crown on her head both foreign and familiar. Footsteps echoed across the hall. Kael appeared, carrying 2 cups of wine. He handed one to her and clinked his against hers. To surviving, he said. To surviving, Ilara echoed. They drank. Kael set his cup aside and pulled her close. Ready to go back to the party? Not yet. Ilara looked up at him. Dance with me. Kael raised an eyebrow. Here. Here. There was no music, no crowd, just the 2 of them. But Kael took her hand and led her into a slow, simple dance. Ilara's leg ached, but she didn't care. She followed his lead, her body moving in time with his, the world narrowing to just this moment, just the 2 of them. When they finally stopped, Kael rested his forehead against hers. I meant what I said earlier. I love you. I know, Ilara smiled. I love you too. Even though I'm terrifying and ruthless and have a reputation for burning villages, especially because of that. Kael laughed, and in that moment, everything felt right. 6 months later, Ilara returned to Mistvale Hollow. It wasn't something she'd planned, but one of the smaller packs in the area had requested her presence, a dispute that needed mediation, and since it was close to her old home, she decided to visit. The village looked the same, small, muddy, worn, but it felt different because she was different. She walked through the streets, Rhea and 2 guards flanking her, and people stopped and stared. Some of them recognized her. She could see it in their faces: shock, confusion, disbelief. The girl who had been discarded was now a queen. Ilara stopped in front of the grand hall, the place where everything had started. The doors were open. Inside, she could see wolves gathering for some kind of meeting. She stepped inside. The room fell silent. An elder she didn't recognize stood at the front. He stared at her, mouth open. Queen Ilara, he stammered. We weren't expecting you. I was in the area. Ilara's voice was calm, steady. I thought I'd pay my respects. She walked down the center aisle, her bad leg dragging slightly, her head held high. She stopped in front of the platform. The place where she had fallen, the place where everything had ended, and where everything had begun. She turned to face the room. I used to think this place defined me, she said quietly. I thought that when I fell, I lost everything. My future, my worth, my place in the world. The room was silent. But I was wrong. Ilara's voice grew stronger. I didn't lose anything here. I learned something. I learned that worth isn't about being perfect. It's about surviving. It's about standing up after you fall. It's about refusing to let anyone else decide what you're capable of. She looked at the faces staring back at her, some guilty, some ashamed, some simply stunned. I'm not here to punish you. I'm not here to make you pay for what you did to me. I'm here to tell you that I survived, and I thrived, and I became more than you ever thought I could be. She turned and walked back down the aisle. At the door, she stopped and looked back one last time. Goodbye, Mistvale Hollow. You taught me everything I needed to know. Then she walked out. Rhea was waiting outside, a small smile on her face. Feel better? Ilara nodded. Yeah, I do. They walked back through the village, toward the horses waiting at the edge of town. As they rode away, Ilara didn't look back. She didn't need to. That part of her life was over, and the future, her future, was waiting. When she returned to Blackstone Keep, Kael was waiting in the courtyard. He saw her face and smiled. How did it go? It went exactly how it needed to. Kael pulled her close and kissed her forehead. Good. They walked inside together, hand in hand. That night, Ilara stood on the balcony of their shared chambers, looking out at the mountains. The snow had melted. Spring was coming. The world was waking up. Kael wrapped his arms around her from behind. Any regrets? He asked. Ilara thought about it.
thought about everything she'd lost, everything she'd gained. "No," she said finally. "No regrets. Not even about the fall." Elara smiled. "Especially not about the fall. If I hadn't fallen, I never would have found you." Kael kissed her temple. "Then I'm glad you fell." "Me too." They stood there, wrapped in each other, as the sun set over the mountains and the world settled into night. Elara had been broken, discarded, forgotten, but she had survived. And now she was exactly where she was meant to be. Queen of the North, mate to the most powerful alpha alive, and stronger than she had ever dreamed possible. The broken outcast had become a queen, and she would never be broken again.